Hey, hope you guys are having a great Sunday. This video is going to introduce or reintroduce you or refamiliarize you with algebraic properties. And what we're going to do is use these tomorrow. So whoops, what I want you to do is really try hard to understand these, and we'll work from them tomorrow. We'll build from them tomorrow. So here are some basic algebraic properties. You may remember them from last year or prior years. The first property is called the reflexive property. And reflexive property, much like looking at your reflection in the mirror, says that this. A is equal to A. Anything's equal to itself, right? So a geometric example of that might be, I don't know, the measure of angle 1 is equal to, yep, you guessed it, the measure of angle 1, right? So the reflexive property says anything's equal to itself. Kind of obvious, but then again, some things are. Another algebraic property is called the transitive property. This is my favorite. It's oh so fun. And the transitive property says if two things are equal to the same, then those two things must be equal themselves. So to write that, I like to write it like this. If A is equal to B, whoops, let's get a different color. And B, that same B, is equal to C, right? Then A has to be equal to C, right? So we have two things, in this case A and B, and C, both of which are equal to the same B, right? They share a common equality, right? An example, let me write this a little cleaner. So if A equals B and that same B equals C, then A equals C. So here's what that might look in geometry land. Let's say you have three segments. 1, 2, and actually let's write this in blue. Blue, 1, for the love of, let's try this, yes, 1, and 2, and 3. And let's call this segment AB, let's call this guy CD, let's call this guy EF. So let's say this happens, ready? What if AB equals CD? Right, the lengths. So what if AB equals CD? And what if that same CD is also equal to EF? All right, then by the transitive property, then AB, the top segment, must be equal to EF, the bottom segment. All right, so in this case we have two segments, both of which are equal in length to CD, right? AB is equal to CD, and EF is equal to CD. So those two purple lengths have to also be equal by the transitive property. Here's another one. It's called the addition property of equality. There's a couple ways this guy can look. Addition property of equality, and there's also subtraction, division, multiplication properties of equality. They're all very similar. And what this says is as such: if A equals B, and if I add C to both sides, now C equals C by the reflexive property, you get it, then A plus C has to be equal to B plus C. All right? In other words, if we start out with two things that are equal, in this case A and B, and if we add the same thing by the reflexive property to both of those things that are already equal, then their sums must be equal. Right? Then A plus C has to be equal to B plus C. Right? And that also works a little differently. Here's a little different look. What if A equals B? And what if C equals D? Well, what we can deduce by the addition property of equality is A plus C has to be equal to B plus D. Okay, again, by the addition property of equality. A little bit different than the last example where we're adding the same c's to both sides by the reflexive property. Here we're adding the same thing but different, but they're all the same, they're equal. All right, so instead of adding c to both sides, we're adding to a and b, which are already equal, two things, but those two things happen to be equal as well. Therefore, the sums have to be equal. Okay, that's the addition property of equality. Now we have other properties of equalities: multiplication, division, subtraction. Multiplication, if you multiply the same z's by same z's, their products will be same z's. Division, if you divide same z's by same z's, then there will be same z's. And subtraction, if you subtract from same z's other things that are same z's, the difference will be same z's. So here's your work for tonight. I want you to think about this one problem. I'm going to start off with some algebra. Let's say 4x minus 2 equals 6. Now you guys know how to solve this, but this is called supply the algebraic property. How do you know? Okay, here's my first step, and you tell me what algebraic property says I can do this to both sides. Yep, that's the addition property of equality. Okay, there are a couple steps in between. I'm going to skip those for the sake of brevity. And what would this be? That's the division property of equality. Yep, dividing something is equal by the same number. And again, there are a couple steps in between, but you get the idea. So that's a little addition property of equality, adding 2 to both sides, to two sides that are already equal. And then this is the division property of equality, dividing both sides by 4. Of course, the sides both being equal originally. All right, so we're going to pick up with this tomorrow. Make sure that you understand these properties, particularly reflexive, transitive, and addition properties of equalities. Thanks for listening. Have a good night. Enjoy the Ravens-Patriots tonight. Go Pats.